my name is Emily, and I decided to do my movement analysis on the activity of coloring. The purpose of coloring for me is it's a leisure activity. It's something that I enjoy doing after a long day of school or work. I know that watching a lot of TV tends to give me a headache, so this is something where I'm away from screens and I get to do something with my hands. And yeah, it's something fun for me to do in my free time. It's also a stress relief for me. I know being a grad student and also working and trying to maintain social relationships and all of those responsibilities, I can get very overwhelmed and stressed out. So this is a way for me to just take time out of my day, focus on coloring and focusing on something that's not it's not stressful for me. This is also a mindfulness activity. It helps me center myself. I'm able to just pay attention to what's going on around me. I'm not on my phone. I'm not thinking about what needs to be done or like what I need to say, what I need to make for dinner. I'm just focusing on coloring and picking the next color and making it look pretty and staying in line. So those are the purposes of this activity for me. There are many action steps when it comes to coloring. So the first step is to pick the pen up from the desk. To do this, your shoulder needs to elevate, abduct, and flex slightly. The elbow needs to be an extension to help pick the pen up. The wrist needs to be in neutral position to stabilize the hand. The thumb is an extension around the pen and then opposition to grasp it. And the fingers are an extension around the pen and then flexion to grasp the pen. The next step, which is putting the pen to paper, the wrist goes into extension and then returns to neutral depending on where you want to color on the page. The next step is to begin moving the pen up and down to add color. So to do this, everything else is pretty much stabilizing except for the fingers. So for this, the 2nd through 5th digits are going in and out of extension. They're flexing and extending slightly at the PIP and MCP joints to spread color throughout the page. The next step would be taking the pen away from the paper. And to do this, the shoulder goes into retraction and then adducts back to midline. The elbow flexes away from the page and the wrist goes into full extension to bring the pen away from the page. And then the last step is putting the pen back on the desk. So for this, the wrist needs to go into flexion to bring the pen down. The fingers fully extend away from the pen and the thumb abducts away from the pen to allow the pen to drop onto the desk. The body positions to complete this task. For best body positions, it would be sitting in a chair at a desk. When you're sitting in a chair, you need your feet flat on the ground, so your ankles in neutral at 90 degrees. Your knees are also bent at 90 degrees, and your hips should be back against the chair, then your back up against the backrest. The non-dominant arm in this position has the forearm resting on the table, and it's using its hand to hold the paper down to stabilize the page and not let it move when you're coloring on it. The dominant hand is also having its forearm lie on the desk, and the wrist is slightly extended to allow the fingers to grasp and then move the pen across the page. A unique characteristic of this activity is the necessity to maintain proper posture. So if you have improper posture, you'll fatigue quicker, your muscles will be painful, they're not going to want to color for much longer if you're not in the correct body position, and you can also get sore and then just want to stop. So if the erector spinae muscles are weak, then the core will be weak and you'll slouch or rest your head on the table, rest your head in your hand. It'll be heavy and you'll not want to continue coloring. So you also need to have a stable base where your legs and sitting in the chair properly, because if the base is unstable, then your upper extremities are overworking to help ensure that your coloring is correct. So you can it'll struggle and then lead to fatigue quicker. So basically you want to maintain proper posture to limit fatigue and muscle soreness. There are many joints and degrees involved in coloring. The atlanto-occipital joint is in flexion while you're coloring, and it flexes to about 40 to 50 degrees so you can see the paper. This occurs in the frontal plane, and it is a concentric contraction. The acromioclavicular joint, or the AC joint, is an upward rotation about 10 to 20 degrees. It's in the frontal plane as well, and it's also a concentric contraction. The sternoclavicular joint, or the SC joint, is in both abduction and flexion. It's abducted about 75 degrees in the frontal plane, and it's also a concentric contraction. And the SC joint is flexed about 10 degrees. It's only a slight flexion in the sagittal plane, and that's also a concentric contraction. At the elbow, the humero-ulnar and humero-radial joint are both in flexion and pronation. The elbow is flexed 110 degrees in the sagittal plane, and it starts as a concentric and then becomes an isometric contraction as you're coloring. They're pronated 5 to 10 degrees in the transverse plane, and again, it starts in concentric and then it's isometric as stabilization. At the wrist, the radiocarpal joint is an extension about 30 degrees, and that's in the sagittal plane, and it's an eccentric contraction and then isometric for stabilization purposes. In the hand, the CMC joint at the thumb is an abduction 50 degrees in the frontal plane, and that's a concentric contraction. The MP and IP joint are both in full extension in the sagittal planes, and that's a concentric contraction as well. The second and third digit MP joints are flexed to 50 degrees in the sagittal plane, and that's an eccentric contraction. The second and third digit PIP joints are flexed to 55 degrees in the sagittal plane, and it's also eccentric. The second and third digit DIPs are in extension, 70 degrees, and it's a sagittal and concentric contraction. The fourth and fifth digit MP joint is flexed to 45 degrees, again sagittal and eccentric. Fourth and fifth digit PIP joints are flexed to 60 degrees, and DIP joints are flexed to 60 degrees, and they're both in the sagittal, and they're both eccentric contractions, sorry. For your base of support, your acetabular-femoral joint is in flexion 90 degrees in the sagittal plane, and it's isometric because it's not moving. Your tibiofemoral is in flexion 90 degrees, sagittal also isometric, and your talocrural joint is in neutral, and it's neutral to 90 degrees. With all of those muscles come joints, with all of those joints come muscles. So the primary muscles involved in neck flexion, the agonist is the sternocleidomastoid, the synergists are the scalenes, longus capitis, and longus cervicis. The antagonist to flexion is the upper traps, levator scapulae, splenus capitis, and splenus cervicis. Shoulder abduction, agonists are deltoids and supraspinatus, and the antagonists are the lat dorsi, teres major, and pec major. Shoulder flexion agonist is anterior deltoid, the synergist is the clavicular head of the pec major and the long head of the biceps. The antagonist is the lat dorsi, teres major, posterior deltoid, and long head of the triceps. Elbow flexion agonists are the biceps brachii, and the synergists are the brachioradialis and brachialis. The antagonists in elbow flexion are the triceps and the anconeus. Elbow pronation agonists are the pronator teres and quadratus, and then the brachioradialis. And the antagonists to that are biceps supinators and brachioradialis. The wrist extension agonists are the extensor carpi radialis longus and brevis, and the extensor carpi ulnaris. And the antagonists are all the wrist flexors because they help provide stability for extension. Thumb abduction opposition are the abducens pollicis and the opponens pollicis. And the finger flexion agonists are your flexor digitorum superficialis, your flexor digitorum profundus, flexor pollicis longus, and flexor pollicis brevis. And the synergist would be the dorsal interossei. To perform coloring, the hand is in the tripod grasp. So this is what it looks like, and then it includes your flexor digitorum superficialis, your flexor digitorum profundus, abducens pollicis, flexor pollicis longus, flexor pollicis brevis, dorsal interosseae, and your opponent's pollicis. Something that makes it difficult for coloring is if you are diagnosed with carpal tunnel. So carpal tunnel is when there's compression on the median nerve and it's difficult for grip, there's pain and tingling and numbness in your wrist and in your fingers. So an adaptation for this would be a slip-on writing aid, so it helps alleviate the pain. It basically holds the pen for you, you just have to move it around. Can help hold the pen in the hand when you're experiencing numbness or pain. It's a less intense grip, it's easier for the artist to color that way, and it can help alleviate the tension in the hand and allow them to still participate in a leisure activity that's important to them. Thank you for listening to my presentation on the movement analysis of coloring. Thank you. Bye.